If you go sit a retreat in any of the Theravada monasteries, or if you do a mindfulness retreat in any of the traditions that are derived from the Theravada tradition, typically one of the first things that you will learn is to do mindfulness of breathing. And the first breath that they often have you work with is the long breath. And the long breath is not a normal breath. And so it kind of depends who's teaching and which style they're teaching in. There are some threads that will teach a meditation in which you do nothing but observe and do absolutely nothing to change or manipulate the breath. Okay? And then there are threads where you will be taught to work, at least initially, with the long breath. And so the long breath is a deep inhale, really expanding the chest and expanding the belly. There's quite a lot of evidence in modern science to explain why deep breathing works well for us in terms of reducing anxiety, reducing blood pressure. Let's see, it lowers your CO2, right? And it increases the oxygen level. So this deep, long breath activates the whole lung and clears out carbon dioxide and introduces more oxygen. The long breath is associated with meditation, I think in part because it has this sort of paradoxical effect on the body and on the brain. Okay, and I'm not talking about the mind exactly, we're talking about the physical brain. Your brain will use as much as 20% of the oxygen that you take in, even though it weighs a lot less than 20% of your body. It's a relatively small piece, and yet it's very oxygen hungry. When you're sitting very still, your body, your muscles, your digestive system, the various other parts of you are using relatively little oxygen. If you're sitting still, you're not doing any of the stuff that requires oxygen. Like you can imagine walking up a flight of stairs and becoming winded, but just sitting here, there's not much going on. And yet, your brain continues to use about 20% of the oxygen you take in. So, when we get into this long breath and we're subtly increasing the blood oxygen level, we are generally feeding the brain oxygen more than we are feeding the rest of the body oxygen, because the rest of the body simply doesn't need it. And so the relaxation that comes from sitting still has one set of effects, which is to be grounding, which is to be physically calming, which is to be emotionally calming. And the increase of oxygen on the uptake has the capacity to keep us awake, right? And a big portion of what we are trying to do is to come into this very relaxed state that doesn't tip over to falling asleep, right? So we will be doing a 15-minute session in which we specifically work with the long breath. And the awareness or the attentiveness is the focus of our meditation. Okay, I'm just giving these instructions early. We'll go through them again. But we will be paying attention both to the breath and to the effort that it takes to maintain this long breath for 108 breaths, or about 15 minutes. Does that make sense to everybody?
I missed that last part. Did you say 108 breaths?
We'll be doing approximately 108 breaths deep, okay, long breath, and that takes about 15 minutes. I may or may not count them for you, or I may simply time 15 minutes. I'm just going to do that. Okay, so come into your meditation posture. Your posture should, above all, be upright and balanced, so that you are engaging your postural muscles, the muscles in your back and in your abdomen, minimally, but just enough to keep you upright. So the initial posture that you set up becomes important in allowing your posture basically to operate on autopilot. And if there is a substantial amount of physical discomfort given the way you are sitting, then it may be reasonable to consider shifting how you sit, increasing the level of support in your back and your spine, what have you. So your postural muscles are engaged, perhaps slightly tonic, just enough to hold you upright and to allow for the chest to open and for the whole front of your body to feel open and relaxed. And pay particular attention to the belly, and particularly the lower belly, and all through the pelvic floor, the pelvic region, everything around your belly button and behind your belly button, including your lower back. And we'll take a minute to come into awareness of the physical sensations of your body. You can draw attention to your eyes and let them go soft, relaxed, completely at ease. And then check the muscles of your face, around your cheeks and jaws, the muscles above and below your mouth. Let all that become completely soft, completely at ease. And then draw attention into the muscles of your neck. Once again, engaged just enough to promote balance. It may be possible that you would want your chin slightly tucked and the back of your head slightly elevated. Do whatever posture works for you. Now bring attention to your shoulders and be sure that there is no physical tension in either shoulder. And then travel with your mind down your arm, allowing the arms to become heavy and limp. Checking in at the bend in the elbow and down through the wrists. The wrists are a place where you may already notice there is a faint set of sensations. They may or may not be wrist shaped. And notice that as you investigate the physical sensations in your wrists, there's very little room for your mind to do anything else. And then check in with your hands. Your hands can become completely soft, completely at ease. to rest wherever they are. And notice that as we release any sense of tension, any sense of readiness, that we can fairly quickly come into a heightened awareness of the incoming signal, the sensations emanating from the head, from the hands. And again, when we are paying attention to the physical sensations in the hands, there's always room to think or do something else, but it's much, much easier not to. And then come back up to the shoulders and the upper back. And notice if there is any tension remaining or that has crept in, allowing your shoulders to fall and relax, to become soft. And then allow your attention to completely suffuse your whole body. And your attention may move around of its own accord, noticing and revealing the points of contact with the cushion or the chair, the places your hands are resting, the background sensations accompanied by being alive, noticing any sensations in your feet, and up through your legs, now begin to arouse just enough energy to lengthen the in-breath. This can be slow, it can be very smooth. You may also notice that the effort required to draw a deeper in-breath changes the character of the breath itself. We will practice with the long breath for just about 15 minutes. I will keep time. And your attention may move. You may find that the long in-breath is stimulating and also relaxing. You may find that there is a modest amount of effort involved with this deeper breath. You can bring your attention to the quality of that effort. You can bring your attention to any kind of emotional resonance you feel with the effort. And you can always return to feeling the breath. If you find that you are becoming drowsy, or if attention has slipped away, then bring attention back to the long in-breath. And then check for constriction or contraction anywhere else. As you continue with the long breaths, you may notice that sensations become prominent, or sensations may come and go. It is okay to take a moment with these sensations, to feel into them deeply, possibly note whether the sensation is pleasant or unpleasant or simply neutral. And then bring attention back to the long breath and the effort involved with maintaining the long breath. As you continue with the long breath, notice if any constriction has crept in, either physical or mental. If you notice any constriction or contraction, simply release, relax, and let go. As you continue with the long breath, take note if any physical sensations have arisen that are not directly connected to the breath. You may be aware of a sense of perfusion or a sense of tingling. There may be locations in your body that have become very faintly activated. Allow these sensations to arise, to persist as long as they will, and then return to the long breath. Good. As you continue with the long breath, bring your attention to the quality of your presence, the quality of your awareness. Do you find that you are alert, awake, good. And now allow your breathing to return to the normal pattern. You may find this is accompanied by a sense of release, of further relaxation. And bring your full attention to that sense of release, of that relaxation. And take note of any space in your body that has released or relaxed as well. And often there will be a wash or a wave of full body relaxation as we release the final bit of effort involved with the long breath. Attending to the breath and to the physical sensations of your body. Good. And now, completely stop doing anything. You will notice that things continue to happen. Your heart will continue beating. You will continue breathing. You may find that things continue to happen in your visual field. Sounds may arise in the field of hearing, the auditory field. Body sensations will continue to arise. There is no need to do anything at all. These things will continue to happen without any input from you. Good. As you continue to relax and to do nothing, you may find that your awareness remains bright and clear. There's no need to direct that awareness. And you may notice that as we do less, there is less happening. You may notice that in the visual field, there are momentary lulls. In the auditory field, there may be softening or slowing. And in the physical body, you may notice sensations, but you may also notice there is room, space between those sensations. Good. Now notice if any kind of activity has crept in. And stop doing anything. Things will continue to happen. You may continue breathing. You may continue thinking and feeling. But if at any point the mind begins to constrict around anything that's happening, simply release, relax, and let go. Good. Now notice if any sort of constriction has crept in, if any sort of doing has arisen. And once again, stop doing anything. Things will continue to happen. And any phenomena that arises into awareness, there's no need to constrict. There's no need to tighten or to judge. Simply release, relax, and let go. Good. Now, as you continue doing absolutely nothing, you may notice that some sensations or some thoughts seem to be more juicy or vivid or occupy a larger portion of your awareness than you would like, simply allow these phenomena to arise and note any constriction that you may have around them, and then release any constriction. If there is any doing at all, stop doing it. Good. Now reintroduce very, very subtle effort to come once again into the long breath. If you find that this shift activates any kind of constriction, release, relax, and continue the long breath. As you continue with the long breath, allow any kind of constriction to fall away, any kind of resistance to your own experience to fall away. Whatever is arising is arising. It doesn't require judgment or action. Allow each experience to arise and persist for as long and as strong as it needs to, without tightening around it in any way. In a moment, I will ring the bell. Pay very close attention. Notice if anything releases or anything reformulates, if anything happens at that moment. Very good. There's no hurry coming back. I think I'll just start talking. So in recent weeks, we have been working with dependent origination, and we've seen this sort of model for how consciousness and the way we perceive the world automatically causes a kind of constriction, causes the arising of a false sense of self, and produces suffering. And then we cooked that down to a couple of key elements, which are constriction and a sense of self, and the kind of alienation and anxiety that arise from that. And then we talked about reversing the process so that self and suffering and constriction can all be seen as basically the same experience arising more or less simultaneously. And the one place we have a tremendous amount of control relative to the others, or opportunity perhaps, is in this area of constriction. So this is a big, complicated model, a lot of detail. And I thought I'd step away from all of that for just a minute and talk about the arc of practice. And this is the arc of practice as it happens over the course of a lifetime. So if we are to look at the Nikayas, which are the big collections of the Buddha's teachings in sort of the earliest, maybe the second earliest strata of collected Buddhist teachings, what we find is that there are a variety of types of teaching that come up. And one of the types of teaching that comes up is the set of instructions. This is what you need to do, and this is how you do it. Another type of sutta that comes up is a drilling down into some concept, some idea. Follow the pattern of someone asks a question to the Buddha says such and such, and then everyone is full of glee and joy and celebrates what a great exposition the Buddha has made. And there's a set of teachings that can be classified as refutations. Okay, these are the stories of philosophers or other religious people who come and pose some kind of argumentative question. And the Buddha turns around and demonstrates very clearly why that thing isn't real, isn't true, isn't necessary, isn't useful. Excuse me. And then through this great big corpus of teaching, there are a couple of arcs of practice that are very clearly delineated in certain places and drilled down into in others. And they're actually extremely simple. For all the material that one can find in the Nikayas, there are two very simple threads that really describe the arc of practice, and they are Samatha and Vipassana. And pretty much all we do is the combination of Samatha and Vipassana, with Samatha being calming and Vipassana being insight. And I'm going to suggest, and I'll come back to this, but for now, that we consider insight, we replace insight with calming or opening. Okay? So it can be useful to describe the practice in these two parts. And the first part is dubbed calming. And if the intellectual understanding of calming was all it took, we would already be done. We could have picked this whole thing up and done it in probably 15 or 20 minutes and then walked away. But this idea of calming and opening, or calming and insight, is a practice that requires time. It requires that we actually embody these things, because having an intellectual understanding is not what this is about. So on the calm side, what we are attempting to do over and over is to cultivate these beautiful qualities of body and mind, mainly of mind. And we cultivate these very lovely qualities of mind that are nourishing and healing to both ourselves and to the people around us. We cultivate qualities first through fairly gross means, and this is why in any classical Buddhist teaching, the first things that will be raised are Buddhist ethics. And these typically involve the precepts, and the precepts that happen for lay people and for monastic people and the people who are participating in a retreat of some sort. And typically these are a list of things, sometimes as short as 5, that are preceded by the words refrain from. So I undertake the training practice to refrain from stealing, to refrain from killing, to refrain from harsh or slanderous speech, to refrain from a various set of things. Monks tend to have a lot more precepts, and most of those have to do with developing their awareness of their own intentions when they do something, and in terms of holding monastic communities together. Some of them are simply rules that are important for the monks to live together and to settle disputes quickly and effectively. So whether we're talking about going on a retreat and taking 5 or 8 precepts, or we're talking about ordaining as a monk or nun and taking on several hundred, the basic effect of Buddhist ethics and the precepts that people take is to promote social harmony and to promote this sense of internal freedom within the confines of knowing exactly what you can and cannot do, what you should and should not do at any given moment. Does that make sense? Because the structure of the precepts is actually liberating. That may sound confusing, but the way that structure operates to liberate us is that by having a set of rules that are prescribed before we get there, these rules have been well considered and allow us to become free of restlessness and remorse. Because when we know what the rules are, and with this particular set of rules, when we abide that way, we become calm. We don't have to worry about having done something wrong. We don't have to worry about somebody coming back and seeking retribution, right? Restless and remorse simply fall away. Once we have taken care of these relatively gross defilements, or the relatively, I would say, low-level needs with regards to safety and security, we have a lot more time left over, time and energy, for cultivating the really beautiful qualities of mind and heart. Okay, and these are the classic kindness and compassion, equanimity. I love equanimity. There is a kind of calm that we develop when we are meditating, and that's a physical calm, it's a mental calm, it's calm of heart. But equanimity is functional calm because it only happens really when we're out in the world, when we're doing things, right? Equanimity says, I take a hit of some sort and I remain calm. I understand how to move through that situation without becoming emotionally reactive. There are also cultivation of patience, of stamina, of curiosity, of interest in things that may not always seem particularly interesting. This is one of the reasons we meditate on the breath or another relatively stationary object, because we're developing that capacity to continue to be interested and alert and aware, which is a capacity that we can then apply to anything else we do. Right? So cultivating kindness and compassion and curiosity, all these good things, are actually completely legitimate pastimes in and of themselves. I don't know that you could necessarily build a whole spiritual practice or a whole religion just out of cultivating these qualities. But if you look across any other religion in the world, one way or another, that's what they're doing, right? There may be a lot of other stuff that anchors or gives meaning to those practices, but the net result is intended at some level to be this generation of calm, this generation of acceptance or non-constriction, non-fighting. And whether we are talking about a community or a partnership or a single person, when we cultivate these beautiful qualities in ourselves, we tend to abide with an internal sense of safety, right? We tend to abide with an internal sense of well-being, of personal and interpersonal ease, and a sense of happiness. So when we cultivate kindness, when we cultivate compassion, there is a kind of peace, a kind of calm, and a kind of happiness that simply arises as a result of living that way. Does that make sense for everybody? So while these pursuits, this pursuit of calm, this pursuit of beautiful internal qualities and social tranquility are all legitimate pursuits in and of themselves, they also create a very conductive or supportive atmosphere for the pursuit of developing insight. Okay? If we are pursuing any kind of challenging endeavor, it always helps to feel calm. It always helps to have some happiness buoying us up. It always helps to feel safe. Right? And the development of insight is not necessarily always going to be comfortable, but it require that we extend ourselves into a place where we are willing to be vulnerable, where we are willing to check out things that are often confusing and don't make a ton of sense. In fact, unwinding some of the ways that we currently do make sense is actually part of what we're after. And it really helps to have this calm heart, calm mind, this gentle sensibility as we go into that work. So, insight itself. If there was a better word for insight, I would definitely use it. But the standard is to call this thing insight. And insight in this context is not an intellectual thing. It is not an aha moment or a moment of intellectual clarity, nor is it the emotional sense that arises when we have those moments of clarity. It is a kind of clarity, but it's not intellectual. Insight in this context, I'm going to describe it in terms of something that we've already been talking about, which is dependent fading. So insight is any sense that promotes or supports a attenuation or a fading or weakening of suffering. Okay? And since the weakening of suffering is accompanied by a sense of liberation, the weakening of suffering, the increase of freedom happen simultaneously. And since, as we know from dependent origination, that as suffering is attenuated, that the sense of constriction and the sense of self must also be attenuated. So insight is any experience, any way of experiencing the world that reduces our suffering, reduces our sense of self, reduces our constriction. And any one of those elements can fall, and the others will naturally fall as well. Is that making sense? Okay. So very sort of overview kind of way. When we become mentally calm, when we become physically calm, when we become calm of heart, we tend to observe more. Okay, we tend to be more open to learning. We tend to be more open to experimentation and trying things. But we also tend to do less. right? When we become very, very calm, typically the normal arc is to become calmer and calmer and calmer, and then boom, fall off to sleep. So what we do in our meditation is to become calmer and calmer, and then balance that up with a sense of awareness and alertness that keeps us from falling asleep. As we become calmer and calmer, we observe more and we do less. We also tend to experience a spaciousness around how we feel and how we think, so that things can come up, things can arise without us becoming constricted around them. And there's sort of a common sense element here. You can consider any part of your day. When you are in a good mental space, when you are relaxed, it almost doesn't matter what someone says or does, it's all good, right? And if someone brings a low-level challenge to you and you don't respond with emotional reactivity, it's much, much easier than to take that challenge and figure out what you want to do together as a solution, right? So as we wind down, as we continue to do less and observe more, it's critically important that one of the things that happens is we simply concoct less. When we turn the volume down on our thoughts and our feelings, we turn our volume down on perception as well. Okay, so it's not so much that things don't continue to happen out there, and it's not so much that we don't continue to notice whatever's happening in here. There is actually less going on in the perceptual field, right? We concoct, we can create less stuff. And so one of the ways that we, one of the kinds of things that we hear referred to in states of deep meditation is this vast spaciousness or this vast emptiness, right? Because what is left when we concoct less, when we produce less stuff with our minds, is that there is actually a sense of openness, a sense of space, right? Does that work? Does that make sense for everybody? So, as we become calm, we get lost in fantasy less frequently because there's simply less fantasy happening. We get less lost in self-judgment or judgment of others or judgment of a sensation or an experience because there's less experience happening, okay, and there's less judgment happening. There's just less. And there's a lot of very esoteric sounding teachings within classical Buddhism where something is neither this nor that, okay? Or someone will ask the Buddha, you know, is it quiet? Well, it's neither quiet nor not quiet, right? And these kinds of neither nor statements apply. I won't restrict them to this, but they apply to this sense that it's not quiet and it's not quiet because it's not anything. Nothing is happening. There is no anything to be quiet, but there is also no mental energy going out in the direction of calling it a thing, of naming it a thing, or even perceiving it as a thing, right? It's as though the lights simply come down and there's just less happening. Once again, the big caveat to all of this is you have to be awake for it to work. And you know, there are three basic, or there are really two basic states mentally that human beings fall into. We are either awake, in which case we are responsive and reactive and attentive. Our muscles do stuff in relation to the mind. Or we are asleep, in which case we're completely not ready for anything. The muscles are soft and the mind has little or no direct connection to what happens. So we generate this altered state, which includes elements of both. And what we do there, in terms of this development of insight, is not simply that we are looking around and trying to figure out what's really going on in there. we are actually allowing for, not forcing, but allowing for less to happen, right? And we end up becoming quite deft or quite skilled at entering into that space and allowing for very, very little to arise. And more time spent in that space takes us down deeper into deeper states of concentration or jhana, until bit by bit the last elements that the mind is producing fade away, right? And that's arahant. That is enlightenment, right? There is a point after which it doesn't reform the same way, so I'm told. Okay, that there is a point of non-returning, that we can easily come back into the world and participate, but some part of that cycle simply stops happening. So, in the mundane world, we continue to exist. There is definitely a being here. The being goes out and does stuff. There is no conflict with that. Inside the meditation, potentially nothing at all exists, right? Things get quiet. Mental chatter falls away. The production of the visual field falls away. The production of everything falls away. And when the things that the mind concocts and produces fall away, suffering falls away too. This is vast emptiness. This is I would say quiet, but I'm not actually sure. The one thing that does continue in that state is awareness. It is possible that if you stay awake and you go that deep, that you can be aware of what's happening there. And that's the key, that's the crucial part. Okay, I think at this point I will open it up to questions. I'm hoping some of that made sense. Rather than the big complicated models, I thought I'd just offer the possibility that the path itself can be remarkably simple, right? We are becoming calm and we're becoming open. We're allowing this insight to arise physically.
Could you come back to the notion of insight?
Yeah. So here again, I think that for the purposes of tonight, I would perhaps trade insight with some other word, and I don't have a better word right now. I would say spaciousness. I might say opening. I might say fading. Okay, dependent fading. But that insight itself is a mode of being. It's a way of seeing the world. It's a way of hearing the world. It's a way of experiencing the world that reduces suffering, right? By definition, we're going to say that insight is a way of being that reduces suffering, in which suffering stops happening so strongly, okay? So a moment of insight, and we have them already. A moment of insight in your meditation could be a situation in which you've just gotten very quiet. You've gotten very calm, and you're paying attention. And this could happen once or 100 times in your meditation. If you're paying attention to the breath, but you're not injecting any kind of constriction around any part of your experience, and you're not suffering, you're simply there riding the breath. Or you're simply there noticing the tingling in your hands. You're simply there. That is insight. That is unconstricted view. Because there is no concocted sense of self. There is no concocted sense that there is something other than self, right? There's no fusing of those two things in opposition to each other. There's none of that happening. Does that make sense, Miley?
Oh yes, it's it's very very helpful. It's just that it's almost that it's not intellectual or a mental. So it's like when I hear what you say, it makes so much sense. But then, like 5 minutes after, I try to remember, and I can't find it again. So that's why I asked you. But it's really beautiful because I always I so far I didn't know what meant the shamatha and the vipassana and insight. It didn't. Yeah, it was not clear for me.
Okay. I think this may help and it may not, but the process of developing insight is, in my view, much closer to training for and running a marathon than people often admit. Okay? It's not an intellectual process. The words that we use back and forth, the intellectual process, the models such as dependent origination, may help you to organize your thinking. Sometimes I have even thought that they really just keep us kind of happy and distracted along the way. They keep us engaged, right? But no matter how much you read about running a marathon, it will not prepare you to go out and run the marathon. Okay, you actually have to go out and put in some miles and go for a hike, go for a walk, go for a run, go for successively longer runs, right? And it's exactly the same that we can talk about enlightenment, or we can talk about suffering, or we can stay engaged with the process. But it's really the process of meditation, really the process of taking our moments of insight that happen in meditation and taking them out into the field, out into the world. Okay? Stopping, pausing, opening, releasing, relaxing, resting, but also engaging, right? We have this very peculiar thing that we're trying to do, which is to come to a complete standstill and to continue to be completely engaged.
I have a question, really. So when I think of insight, or what we're calling insight, what I am thinking about is really, it's probably gives us that ability to see, or to become aware, maybe not see, how our mind creates our reality in a way, rather than paying attention to what we are experiencing. So rather than experiencing what we're experiencing, we create stories, or create a reality to explain things, rather than stopping and paying attention. I guess what I'm saying is we might, my mind goes in automatic reactive mode rather than paying attention. And this to me means you pay attention to what is going on rather than jumping to a story.
Yeah.
Is that what could be what we're trying to achieve because with the word insight, with practice?
Yeah. There are successive layers, right? And the training actually follows these layers. So this idea that ethics comes first, or sila comes first, is to clear away the most obvious distractions, the things that make us feel unsafe, the things that give us, the things that directly contribute to our anxiety, our restlessness, and remorse. And then as we come down through those layers, it becomes evident that we are lost in thought a lot of the time, okay? And being lost in thought is very, very closely related to concocting this sense of self, right? And as we come down through the layers, we are able to step away from being lost in thought and to continue to pay attention to something rather than being pulled off by whatever is arising. When we've got that kind of stability, it becomes much, much easier to let things happen in the periphery while we remain aloof from them, while we remain detached from the stuff. And when we're detached from the stuff, it disempowers that stuff. it starts to fade. It starts to go away. So this idea that we construct our reality is really a much more literal translation of what we're doing. We are fabricating on the inside some kind of reflection of everything that's happening inside and outside. And so the less we fabricate, the less we do, the less of that process happens and the weaker it gets. And what's left inside there is this very clean, pure awareness, but it isn't actually being aware of anything, right? And that is tremendously liberating. Okay. Alrighty. I'll end on that note. I'm not sure if all three of you are on my email list. I wanted to just to make sure to put it out there that I do have a list. I have made so few announcements that even if you're on it, you probably wouldn't know. But the list is going to become more important come summertime and then come fall, because I'm going to be going back to work, and schedule being what it is, it will be good to be able to communicate. So if you want to, you can put your email into the chat, or I can send you my email out in the chat right now, and you can just send me an email directly and I'll add you to the list.
I think I'm on your list, Scott.
Yeah, I think you are too. Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm on it too, but I'll send you an email to be sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so come August, I'm probably going to take a couple of weeks off, and then come September, I'm intending to continue, but there may be some shuffling in terms of how the class. So we'll figure it out. Okay. Okay, we got Miley. Good. I think, Miley, you're probably the only one who's not on the list already, so I just want to make sure. Okay, very good. Well, thank you as usual for being here. I really appreciate your practice.
Thank you very much.
We'll take it up again next week.
Scott.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Okay. Okay, let's get Miley Fong right now.